Hello everyone, I am Gülçin Sınav, Program Director at Friedrich Naumann Foundation in Turkey.
And I'm Andreas Marazis, Researcher and Project Manager at the European Neighborhood Council. And together we are the ENC Dev podcast hosts. Today's in-depth discussion is the second of a series of podcasts which are part of the Beyond Erasmus, Education, Exchanges and Employment Opportunities for Youth in the EU and Turkey. The project is supported by Friedrich Naumann Foundation in Turkey and aims at promoting student mobility beyond the Erasmus Plus framework. Youth exchanges, internships, training courses, networking, access to funding for small and medium enterprises, and free market entrepreneurship and civil society organizations, among several other things.
In today's podcast, we will focus on EU-Turkey relations from historical, cultural, political, and economic point of view. Tough task to accomplish in about 30 minutes, of course, but we are lucky to virtually have with us two excellent experts, friends, and long-lasting partners who will help us in today's discussion. Çiğdem Naz, she is the Secretary General of Economic Development Foundation, EKV. Welcome, Çiğdem.
Thank you for the invitation.
And Samuel Doveri Vesterbye, ENC Managing Director. Welcome, Samuel.
Thanks a lot for the invitation, and hi to all of you.
So let me also welcome both of you, Samuel and Çiğdem, to our ENC in-depth podcast discussion. Unfortunately, we are still not able to have a physical, like face-to-face discussion, but soon I hope that we'll have the chance to organize these meetings face-to-face. Let me start our discussion by asking you first, Çiğdem, and so as to kickstart our podcast discussion. I would like you to tell us if you can explain actually how the EU's and Turkey's culture, history, politics, and economics are tied together.
Thank you. Of course, when we look at the history of Turkey, the Turkish Republic, we can go back to the Ottoman Empire and the foundation of the Republic in 1923. And since the Ottoman days, Turkey's history has been quite closely interlinked with Europe. And in 1856, in the Paris Congress, the then Ottoman Empire was declared as a European power, part of the balance of power of Europe. And then with the foundation of the Republic, we have also seen that the new state was formed along the lines of a European state, both in terms of the legal system, education, and also administrative structure. Turkey then became also a member of European and transatlantic organizations after the Second World War. It has been one of the earliest members of the Council of Europe, and then NATO, and also the OECD. And it has had quite close relations since then. It has also signed an association agreement with the European Community in 1963. Especially in terms of the political links, Turkey has aspired to become a member of the EC and then the European Union. And economically, there's also a quite close relationship. Nearly half of Turkey's exports go to the European Union countries, and there is a customs union in industrial goods. So there is total freedom of movement of industrial goods between Turkey and the EU. And also Turkey applies the common customs tariff of the EU since 1996. So this also creates quite close economic bonds between the parties. And culturally, we can say that Turkey is a very diverse country, including different local and ethnic cultures inside itself. But it has always been quite closely influenced by European culture, and we have been a part of various European projects and programs in culture and education. And also when we ask Turkish people where they want to study or where they want to travel, etc., the destination is usually other European countries. So Europe, I think, in terms of a cultural space, is also very important, and we can say that Turkey is also a part of that cultural space.
Thank you very much, Çiğdem. Samuel, may I add your thoughts and views on the same question?
I think Çiğdem gave a very, very comprehensive answer to that question. And maybe I can add, from a geographical perspective, from a traditional geographic perspective, Europe has been interpreted in very diverse ways throughout history. When you look at the first big schools of cartography leading all the way up into the 20th century that Çiğdem was mentioning now, with the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the establishment of the modern Turkish Republic, you see that interpretations about what Europe is varies. How much of the Mediterranean is Europe? How far do we need to go into Asia and Russia? There's been a consensus that somewhere around the Ural Mountains is where Europe ends. But when we take the concept of Eurasia, which has Europe in it, Europe in it, that's even extended further. With regards to Turkey, when we look at some interpretations, the Bosphorus has always been a kind of a marking line. But then when we look at the evolution of those interpretations, we realize that because of all the maritime traffic and because of the important trading routes which link Asia and Europe, and also north and south through the Bosphorus Straits, this interpretation becomes more fluid and it starts including more and more of what is Anatolia. And maybe to add religious or cultural and even mythological aspect to it when we go back in history, it's also interesting to see how, for example, the basis of our mythologies in Europe, including some of the most important figures like Cybele, Kiveli, the goddess of fertility. The statues of the goddess of fertility are not found in Italy, and they're not found in Holland. They're found in the middle of Anatolia. So the concepts of our shared geography and even shared history, I think, go very, very far back. That's just on geography. You mentioned history and politics and economics as well when you talk about the relationship between the EU and Turkey. And there we can fast forward to the era that Çiğdem very carefully depicted. And maybe the only aspect I can briefly add to that is that coming up to the 1990s, as Çiğdem mentioned, there is the customs union. In 95, 96, the EU and Turkey signed this agreement, and it's historical in binding existing bonds into an economic framework, because Turkey is the only country which is granted this very privileged status of economic relationship. I think the only other two non-EU countries is San Marino and maybe Monaco. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe so. These are tiny countries, and without saying anything offensive, in simple scale of economics, they are somehow not so relevant for the EU's economic trade. Whereas Turkey, the only country that's part of the customs union, is included in this framework and is a heavyweight when it comes to economics. And it's the only country, and it's also a Muslim country, that's included in this framework. And this occurs in the 1990s and has basically shaped EU-Turkey relations since. And it's also, I don't know what Çiğdem has to say about this, but I would also say it has shaped Turkey's internal economy. So these are some important aspects of the relationship. And then we can fast forward even further up until now, in which the discussions about culture and religion, the post 9/11 era, the post Huntington era, there was a moment in which people were saying religion and culture don't matter so much. I think we've entered into a new phase in the last 5-10 years in which these things matter more and more. And some people see it, of course, negatively, and there are many negative aspects about it, but there are also positive aspects about it. A country like Turkey that has a fundamentally mixed cultural background, perfectly mixing East and West, and having both religion and secularism embodied in one nation, will play a relevant role in the future. Maybe some Europeans don't always see it today, but I think cultural anthropologists, sociologists, and historians are very aware of this.
Actually, our next question is a bit related to our these current relations between EU and Turkey, Samuel. So for the last years, we haven't heard that much good news when it comes to the EU and Turkey relations, but the trend appears to be improving again because of different global developments. What can you tell us about that, Samuel, for the current relations?
The EU and Turkey went through a long period of difficulties over the past, well, nearly since its inception, meaning the opening of the accession talks with Turkey and also officially of opening of the chapters. There was a brief period in the mid-2000s where there was a high degree of optimism and also an accelerated level of reform process, which included things like judicial independence and also reform for Kurdish linguistic rights and many other very positive developments which took place as I said, in the mid-2000s and then leading up into the end of 2008, 2009. And then there was a period which followed that where Turkey regressed in terms of its reform process, and there was a centralization of power among the governing party, AKP, and notably among Erdogan, who then afterwards also cemented his position through the presidential model. But this did not happen in a vacuum. And at the same time, the European Union, its electorates lost interest in Turkey. It's important to mention that certain member countries inside the EU blocked it because of the Cyprus issue and because of political issues. It's important to mention that while these, I would say, negative processes occurred domestically inside Turkey, other things happened inside the EU in tandem. And those things were the debate about what the future of Europe should look like. And in that equation, there was the development of the far right, who were more anti-Turkish because of this dichotomy or this division between religion, but also in the more mainstream political parties of countries like France, there was a realization that you cannot have endless enlargement with endless integration. So here there was a conflict of interest, let's say, in the sense that some countries didn't want more enlargement and they wanted more integration. And then, of course, you add Brexit to this equation, and you very quickly realize that the ones who wanted deeper integration won, and the ones who wanted wider enlargement lost. So this is very important to bear in mind to contextualize how we ended up in the situation we are in today. And I say this because when you take the general media environment, there is a lot of what do you call it? A lot of unfair accusations on one side or the other, which don't always amount to the reality. Now, coming to the situation of today, tensions escalated much further in the Eastern Mediterranean, and now the situation seems to have improved a little bit. There is still a degree of uncertainty about what will happen next, but there is also a degree of optimism with regards to what could happen next. And the optimism is due to the fact that it appears as if the government of Turkey is more willing to have a pro-European approach And the optimism is also based on the fact that certain countries in the EU, notably Germany, appears to want to build bridges and also to avoid an escalation in the Eastern Mediterranean. I'm sure that maybe Çiğdem wants to add also.
Yes, I was just going to ask, like, Çiğdem, what were your views on the current status of EU-Turkey relations?
As you have asked, we have some amount of improvement, let's say, in Turkey relations recently, which is within the framework of the positive agenda, which was put on the table by the European Council. And we have seen, especially last year in 2020, a lot of tension building in the relations, mostly, as Samuel has said, around the question of Eastern Mediterranean. Turkey has sent its ships for some drilling activities off the coast of Cyprus and also on the Aegean in some disputed sort of waters, which has created again some controversy, and the EU accused Turkey of being provocative and acting unilaterally, infringing the rights of the EU member states. And here we have seen that Turkey's position in terms of its strategic interests has collided, let's say, with the EU's priorities and some of the interests of the EU member states. We have also seen a lot of sort of tension building in our relations with France, not only with Greece or with the South Cyprus. Then we have seen especially some attempts by Germany in mediating, and also attempts by the High Representative Josep Borrell. And he also tried to create a new sort of engagement between Turkey and the EU, because the relations have become so full of tension, and none of the institutional mechanisms were working. So from that point, I mean, you couldn't go anywhere which would be worse. So there would only be maybe a return to some form of engagement. And this was basically on the within the framework of the positive agenda. As again Samuel said, there is still some ambiguity. So we can say maybe that the glass is half empty, half full. We can be still skeptical about how this process is going to proceed, but there are still some glimmers of hope, let's say, for a revitalization of the relations. And one of the, I think, most important avenues for progress is the customs union modernization, which has been discussed and debated for a number of years now, but there, because of some political vetoes and because of, again, some deterioration of, let's say, political criteria in Turkey, we couldn't really see the opening of this process. But within the positive agenda, maybe we can see some progress. Another issue is the refugee, of course, issue. Here, the EU has been very sort of forthcoming, and they wanted to continue the cooperation in the refugee issue, but it is still limited to the Syrians in Turkey and based on some financial assistance to projects for Syrians in Turkey and also some other countries in the region. So I think a decision has been also adopted by the EU for the continuation of assistance for Syrians. Another important issue is, of course, the visa liberalization process, which had started in 2013, but it has been, again, a quite difficult process. We have seen some acceleration in 2015-16 together with the Syrian refugee crisis, and there were even some target dates which were pronounced by the EU, like June 2016, October 2016. However, the process couldn't really reach its final destination. And since then, we have sort of, again, a stalemate in the visa liberalization process. And this issue of freedom of movement have also been integrated into the positive agenda, but the EU is, I think, taking care that they do not use the word visa liberalization, but they only talk about contacts between peoples, increasing exchanges, especially Turkey's participation into EU projects and programs. So I think they have also sort of downgraded this goal of visa liberalization. And another issue is the high-level dialogues, which is the third issue, which was again included in the positive agenda. So high-level dialogues between Turkey and the EU in political and economic issues, and now recently public health and climate have also been proposed by the EU for engagement at high level between Turkey and the EU. So of course, this is not really a sort of a very exciting prospect for the relations, but when we consider the intervening sort of conditions which make it very difficult for the accession process to really reach its conclusion, the positive agenda at least provides us some hope of a revitalization and a new engagement, let's say, between Turkey and the EU.
Thanks a lot, Çiğdem, for your final points, which basically helps me connect to the next question. And I would like, to admit for a second that accession is unlikely or maybe even unattainable. So the question is like, what's second best then for Turkey and the EU? What's a modus vivendi framework for the future that doesn't downgrade Turkey, but still builds on years of integration? I would like to hear your views. I would like to stay with you, actually, Çiğdem, and then I will give the floor to Samuel for his remarks on this question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, under the current conditions, the prospect of full membership seems quite difficult to achieve because of all the different conditions that we have talked about. And still, of course, there is a need for engagement between Turkey and the EU because there are many common issues of concern. Economics is one of them. There is already the customs union, which is a very quite advanced level of integration economically. And then we have the refugee issue where the EU also needs Turkey to engage in order to sort of cooperate with the EU in terms of irregular migration. And then we also have several other issues, especially related to security, fighting terrorist networks, etc. So there are a lot of common interests. So this also necessitates a new sort of framework to bring Turkey and the EU together. However, of course, since we have already, I mean, Turkey and the EU has already place the relations within the framework of accession, it is quite difficult to really downgrade the relations from the accession to another framework. So I think it needs some time and also some efforts at adjustment. As you say, it will be the second best. And I think to interrogate what the second best can be, we can still go back to the association relationship because we already, as we said, have an association agreement, the Ankara Agreement, which dates back to 1963. Although it may seem a bit outdated at the moment because it has been a long time since then, still the association agreement is quite a comprehensive agreement because it includes targets in all the different areas of free movement of goods, free movement of persons, free movement of capital, free movement of services. And much of these targets which were placed in the association agreement could still not be attained. So we still have some unattained goals which had been in the association agreement. And it also, of course, links with the customs union modernization process because the customs union was also built on the association agreement. So now I think Turkey and the EU can work on the modernization of the customs union because it has been, again, quite some time since its entry into operation, and it doesn't include agricultural goods, it doesn't include services. It has also some weak points regarding dispute settlement and effective consultation between the parties. So we can work on the present customs union in order to transform it into a much sort of modern and also a revised sort of commercial and economic partnership. And in addition, we can also add maybe certain security dimension, refugee dimension, cultural dimension, etc. However, of course, there is always the danger that it will be transformed into something like this privileged partnership, which Turkey was against at the beginning of the accession process. So I think it has to be sort of put in such a frame that it can be acceptable to Turkey, and it will not be like it will not be something that will replace the accession perspective. So we can say that maybe in the future, when and if the conditions are ripe, then accession can be revitalized, restarted. So we shouldn't say, okay, this is a sort of a full stop to the accession process, but it is like in refrigerator as it has been, or in deep freeze as it has been for some time. But we have to also create a new framework, a more viable, feasible framework for Turkey and the EU. And I think it can be based on the association agreement that we already have, and the customs union modernization process can be like the motor of this new relationship.
All right, thank you very much, Çiğdem. I'm very curious to hear Samuel's views on that, since Samuel, you are such a strong proponent of the updated customs union. So please go ahead, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, I have to admit that Çiğdem is a foremost expert on this, and she gave, again, a very comprehensive view. So I would like to avoid necessarily repeating what has been said. So maybe what I can add is the fact that a very important change has occurred over the last 10 years, which makes negotiations between the EU and Turkey a little bit difficult, even when we're talking about a reformed customs union and a new relationship. And the difference is that, 10, 20 years ago, geoeconomics and geopolitics, both regionally but also internationally, looked fundamentally very different. And today, whether we look at international institutions or even regional institutions, there is unfortunately a lower level of trust in these institutions, and also there is increasingly bilateral and geo-economic and geopolitical relations which are taking place. This means that when this new framework is being negotiated, I would say that it makes sense to already predict an increasing amount of difficulties and stumbling blocks along the way. And that is because whether it's France or whether it's Turkey or whether it's other regional countries, they are increasingly involved in energy-related, conflict-related, infrastructure-related, and trade-related projects or policies in other countries. And these sometimes clash. And Turkey is very, very much involved in this, and so are other European countries. And I say this because this will inevitably have an effect on both accession, but also on a potential new framework. So that's why it's very important also to bear in mind that when we talk about the Eastern Mediterranean and when we talk about trade and customs union and supply chains, it's also important to remember that these are geopolitical functions in one way or the other. And whether we look at Libya or whether we look at gas in the East Med, or whether we look at gas with Iran or Azerbaijan, they are of course interrelated, and they will have an impact, as I mentioned before, on what Çiğdem just mentioned. So as a consequence, it's very, very important to remember that certain member countries inside the EU must be more involved in order for the process that Çiğdem, and I agree mostly with what Çiğdem has just mentioned, but in order for that process to function smoothly, it will be increasingly necessary for certain EU countries to also develop a better bilateral relationship with Turkey. Germany already has a very good relationship, but France has had a bumpy relationship over the past 2 decades and so forth. And France also happens to be a country which is in opposition to Turkey when it comes to, in part, Syria and definitely Libya. Now, so in order for this relationship then to improve in order for the customs union reform to be more successful, and also to be able to add other things into this framework that Çiğdem mentioned, namely security, CVE, and countering violent extremism, migration, and energy, it is necessary for France to be on board. And it's also necessary for some of these regional conflict points and regional disputes to be solved. And those are more likely to be solved bilaterally than through the EU at the time being, or at least there will be need for bilateral coordination. And as I mentioned before, those are namely related to the advantages that France will be able to see in its relationship, both in terms of transport, connectivity, and trade with Turkey. Energy will be crucial here as well. And within that context, for Turkish and French energy interests to align, it's very, very important that the JCPOA, or the so-called Iran deal, is revitalized or revived, because there is really a mutual interest there. And it's also very, very important that Turkey and France delve into discussions on infrastructure projects and connectivity, namely for the region with regard to Central Asia, the Caucasus, and the Middle East. And finally, that Turkey and France also find consensus on geopolitical issues linked to Syria and Libya, which is of course a complicated process, but which is a bilateral process which is needed in order for this more multilateral process linked to customs union and EU-Turkey relations to then improve.
Okay, thank you. At this point, our discussion has come to an end, and I would like to take the opportunity to thank you, both of you. So you shared your views and comments with us. The next in-depth podcast is dedicated on topics and jobs of future. This would be the part 3, so stay tuned. That was the ENC in-depth podcast with Gülçin Sınav and Andreas Marazis.